Welcome back to the Silver Lining Podcast with Luke and Monica, episode 2.
Yes, professional. Episode 2. We got this down. We've got two listeners, and we feel like that's enough. Like, to be honest, it gives us a chance to share our story and not have to worry about too much judgment. It's great. Thank you, Mom and Dad.
They already know our story.
Well, yeah, we probably should get them in to tell their version of our story, because it's probably way more hilarious than
A lot more entertaining.
Yeah, a lot more entertaining. Yes. So, and there are aspects that we'll talk about that you will laugh with them and for them. But I want to talk about something today. We're going to get into our stories. So we're looking like, hey, why did we start the podcast? Well, it's for God's glory, and I think that eventually there'll be some pretty intense. I think we had a political disclaimer. And I just have a feeling that we're going to actually talk some politics, not because we want to get involved in politics, but because there's a lot of things in our culture that are going to maybe contradict or bring, or maybe, I don't know how to say this. Basically, it's in scripture. Like, there's just a lot of issues that are, to us, are scriptural issues that are showing up in politics. So that's not what we're talking about today, though. We're actually talking about really our story. And it sounds real like, to me, it sounds really arrogant. Like, we're going to talk about our story. Like, let's talk about me. You know what I like about you is you like me and I like me. And so that's what, yeah. Anyway, but the whole concept of like, hey, we get to share our story, not because of, hey, look at us and look at the life that we get to live, because to be honest, we have a lot of problems and we're real humans and all that as well. But also,
And we have 4 kids.
That's not a downside. That is a fact.
It's just facts.
Yeah. But really, this is Jesus' story, and we want to give him the glory for what he's done in our life, what he's doing in our lives, and what he's going to do in spite of us as we continue to try to point to him. And then I'll also say this: if you are listening to this and you don't know Jesus as your Savior, and you don't understand what it means to have a saving knowledge of Jesus, or have a relationship with Jesus, we would love to have that conversation with you. I'm sure there'll be a time we produce some more content specific to that. But if for any reason, if you're listening to this, obviously this is, October of, well, it's obvious to us, October 2025, but you might be listening to this in months or days or years or whatever. Get a hold of us. The most important thing we can do is make sure that you know where you're going to spend eternity. And while part of our story is going to talk about life and death today, we really want to be able to point others to Jesus. And really the silver lining aspect of our podcast is to give God the glory, and really be grateful for the opportunity we have to live in his presence and have peace irrelevant of our circumstances. And so today, I took Monica coffee at her work for just a few minutes and said hi. And in the process of kind of knowing that we were getting ready to record the podcast, she said, "Hey, what's the podcast about this week? Episode 2? Like, we have all this plans. We don't really know. We're nowhere to share our story, but we don't know. We don't have like this, as much as ChatGPT was supportive, we didn't prompt it enough to get an outline of our future. We're just kind of winging it in a concept." And so she said, "What are we talking about?" And I gave an answer that I thought was a great answer. We're going to talk about this concept, and I'm going to give my perspective of it, and then she can give her perspective of it, and you can say that I was right, but don't you say in the comment, I already know anyway. And so I told her we'd been listening to a message from our youth pastor in church on Sundays preaching, and it was a beautiful message on prayer and the relationship of God with prayer and kind of how God responds. And there's a testimony being given by a faithful man in our church talking about how God had answered prayer and saved the life of his grandchild. And it was really beautiful. And we love those stories. And I hope that you have those stories in your life. And so I got this harebrained idea. I'm like, we are going to talk about, and so she said this, and I said this, hey, we're going to talk about how God always answers prayer. We got talking again, and I kind of wrapped up, had to go back to work. I was only there for a few minutes, and I didn't give it a second thought, because I have a direction that I'm going with the fact that God always answers prayer. And yet tonight when I got back,
I thought about it all day long, and I totally disagree.
Carry on with that. Yes.
Well, because in my mind, it was, when you pray for something, you either get yes, or you get wait, or you get no. So when that no to me is no, God doesn't always answer your prayers. But you had a different opinion on that.
Yeah, a different opinion. So she thinks we're going to have a debate tonight.
Oh, I did. I was like, this is going to be interesting. Yeah. Episode 2, debate.
Yeah, we're already in disagreement. Let's see how far this podcast can go. See if we can get to number 3 here. We are, kind of like, we're out. And And the perspective was, and the reason that I was thinking that is because in the perception of most of us have been through scenarios where we have prayed for individuals that have been in the hospital. We've prayed for babies that have different diseases and need like a miraculous, they just need God to intervene on their behalf. And God has done it. And that's an incredible testimony to who God is. It strengthens our faith. I've been in scenarios where we've just prayed for a miracle, and maybe after weeks or months or even years, God has allowed these individuals specifically in hospital situations to walk out and praise the Lord, and we'll give God the glory. But to me, I also know there's a downside or a different side of sometimes God says no. And to me, and this is where we are going to agree on the concept, God does always answer your prayers. He just doesn't always answer them the way that you want him to in the way that you prayed. Case in point, sometimes God says no, but no is an answer. Sometimes God says wait, and wait is an answer. Sometimes he says yes, and that's what we wanted. And so we're like, oh, we'll praise the Lord and give him the glory, and you should and be grateful for it, but he doesn't have to. And so our message today is that of like, hey, I'm gonna open up and bow your heads, close your eyes. But the concept is that God is answering our prayers and God is always working. And sometimes the answer is not what we want, and it's not at all what we think is best for us. But that doesn't mean that is not what God is going to be able to get glory from or use for our good and for his glory. And so we think the concept of Isaiah, let me see what's here, but the concept of Isaiah um, 55, 8 and 9 says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. The hard part of prayer isn't believing that God can, it's trusting him when he doesn't. And so obviously I need you to say that we're aligned and we're on the same
Yes.
track now.
Now that
But
you explained it.
yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
But it didn't sound so good coming out. It wasn't as graceful when he said it fast earlier.
Yes, she did not have gracefully listening ears. All that to say, I was thinking how I was going to, and I don't even know how I'm going to title it. So I'm not going to give you the title for this because we might rely on ChatGPT to help us with the best title for this. But I was thinking like, how do I get people to like be triggered enough to listen to this? Like, what do you mean God answers all of our prayers? Well, I hate to disappoint you, but he does answer your prayers. He doesn't always answer them the way that you pray them, but he does answer them. And sometimes that's no, and sometimes that's wait. And sometimes it's just hold on. Like the wait aspect is literally like, hey, there's more to the story than we get to know, because we get to see based on our experiences and our trends and what we're feeling, and that's a lot of what we kind of create a reality based on what we're feeling. And God tells us not to trust our emotions. Like sometimes what you're feeling is not based on truth, it's just based on what you feel. Feel what you need to feel, but that doesn't mean that's the reality of what is. And so all that to say, as we're talking today and having this conversation, we do want to talk about how God answers prayers, and we get to be the living proof of how God answers prayers. But if we go back over the last many years of we're not that old, so some years of our lives, and we laugh about this, but we get to literally see how God, as a sovereign God, has brought us to this place where we're now talking and we get to share our story, his story, Alicia's story, and talk about what God has done in our lives and how good God is. Even in times of our life, we can go back and see how good God was, even if we couldn't see it then. And I think it's a beautiful testimony to the sovereignty of God and how he works. And we're going to rely on that. Now, we don't have all the answers. And to be honest, we're probably going to say things wrong sometimes. Like we're probably going to say things that, and not intentionally, but we're going to say things that are counterintuitive or counter to the Bible, not because we don't believe what the Bible says, but just because our hearts and feelings say things. I want to give that disclaimer. Say like, well, you said, well, we're going to make mistakes because we're human. Think about her choices. She stepped on a duck. Praise the Lord. But
Let's start that.
yeah, that means we got to get serious and I got to stop talking or start talking. And so we're going to go back. I'm going to try to prompt a little bit of what Monica's story is, because we are going to tell our story. But we're going to start with a little bit of the hard part and really get to the good part. And eventually over the next several podcasts, we'll actually go back and talk about some different seasons in our life where we weren't together, and there was different individuals in our lives, and how God used that to get us to a point and really made us who we are and strengthened our faith. and strengthen our relationship with him when he wasn't answering our prayers. So I'm gonna prompt Monica a little bit for just a second. We're gonna go back. I want you to take us back um, after the divorce, beginning of COVID. You get diagnosed with cancer. Kind of walk us through a very broad. We'll go into more details later, but give us a broad view of your cancer walk. Kind of walk 2022 and the beginning of 23, and then I'm going to come and talk about kind of where I was in my life and how God was using completely different circumstances in our life to prepare us for a better yes.
That's a good song
It's a good
too,
song.
by the way.
We
We
played
had
that.
it played at our wedding.
Yeah,
Yes.
I had a friend share that with me. That was a tremendous encouragement during my time when Alicia had passed away, and I was grieving her and stuff. And that was a song that a friend gave me, and I shared it with Monica. She's like, "Ah, that's such a good song." So we
Yeah,
played it at our
really
wedding.
good.
It's really great. So
So at the end of 21 is actually when I found out I was sick. That's I went in 4 days before Christmas and had a colonoscopy, and I had been pretty sick over the last year. I had a lot of stomach problems and just a lot of stomach problems. And so they were doing a colonoscopy to rule out whether I was like allergic to something or
at
something like
IBS or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. But in my heart and mind, I knew something way bigger than that was wrong just because of how sick I had been. So, um, I had my colonoscopy and then I like, you come to and my mom is sitting there crying and I was like, shoot, I should have told her because I knew, well, I mean, she knew that I was sick, but I knew something was worse than that. And so I'm like immediately like, "I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I knew something was super wrong." And then the doctor comes around the corner and is like, "Yeah, we're pretty sure you have cancer. We'll send the results off and try to get them back ASAP." But he was pretty sure that that's what I had.
You start your treatments, and
Yes, I started my treatments in February, and I had uh, 8 rounds of chemo treatments. So from February to May, every other week I had chemo treatments. And then I did um, the month of July, I had radiation. I had 28 radiations. And then I took chemo pills during that time too with the radiation. I took those. They gave me a month to kind of rest from that, to kind of let my body heal from that. And then in October of 22, I had my first surgery.
so she has her first surgery. That technically removed the cancers. Again, this is we just celebrated this
Yeah,
yesterday.
yesterday was
3
3
years.
years cancer free.
So she's cancer free. She has a stoma bag, and
Oh,
if you've
yes,
dealt
yeah,
with the
forgot
grief,
about
which is uh, a funny story we'll talk about later, so some look forward to in the different scars that we share.
that.
For those of you that have been a part of my life, I had a surgery in 2016, and so I have a stoma scar as well. And for those of you that have carried that grief,
Mhm.
the question is, what did you name your stoma system? Great. My sister Grace named mine Patrick. No offense to any Patricks, but that's what stuck. And yours,
Mine was Ellie.
Ellie. So we got Ellie and Patrick. And so I really think we need to get some dolls or something, go along with
They'd
Spanky
be
and,
really freaky looking.
just talking about different areas and times in our life. And so, obviously during that time, there's a lot of people that are praying for you during that time that you're going through church, and just a lot of individuals who are being supportive, and, between choir and stuff during that time. I know that you talked about that aspect.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of people praying. And what's the prayer at that point? The prayer is what? Like, what are people praying?
That God would heal my body.
That God would heal your body,
Mhm.
that He would take away the cancer, and obviously for peace and for strength and for a lot. And while I'm sure during that time it felt pretty dark and miserable because you're just,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, right.
It was, but I so right before
There
didn't
you
say
go.
this part.
That's
Right
good.
before I had my first chemo, Marsha Miriam was in the lobby at church and she was like, "Oh, how are you feeling about tomorrow?" And I was like, "Honestly, I'm really scared to death that I'm gonna just sit in that chair and I'm gonna cry all day." Like it was I
Yeah.
really thought that. And
And
she looked at me and was like, "No, you're not." And I was like taken back, like, okay, well, how does she know? She was like, because you're going to wake up tomorrow with strength that you don't have today. And that stuck with me every single day through my whole entire journey.
Yeah. It reminds me of that song Day by Day. By the way, not in the show notes. We don't have this in the show notes. I'm diverting from our plan that we don't actually have. Just with this out there. Like a lot of times we like to have a plan. We talk about the plan and then they're out with a plan. But they call it the song Day by Day, which I love the song. It's one of my favorite songs, day by day with each passing moment. You know, there's a lot in what God has for us in our lives. And I strongly believe that one of the most beautiful pictures of who God is to us is that he is all sufficient. And so we get this thought, like this thought that he's more than enough. And obviously he's more than enough for everything. He's all powerful, all sufficient, omnipresent, all that stuff. But for you in your life, he's all sufficient, which means he's just enough. And he's got the perfect amount that you need. He doesn't need to be more than enough. He knows how to be just enough for you. And in the day by day aspect, a lot of times there's the look forward to, if I can't give anymore, I can't do it, I don't have it in me to be able to keep going. And this is where going to a place where even Elijah, a great man of God, and the angel of the Lord says, the journey is too great for you. There's some food, eat a Snickers, take a nap, because there's a big thing that God has for you, but it's too great for you. And in our life, as we go back and look at this story, which is, you think about like, well, who wants to go through cancer? That sounds like a horrible thing. Why would God put you through that? Well, for her good and for his glory, for your good and for his glory. And one of the privileges that we have is that God trusts us with really hard things. That's where he gives us the fruit of the Spirit is long suffering. Well, why would we need long suffering if we weren't going to suffer? God's not promising you an easy life. He's promising you a life that with him is beautiful and peaceful, not because it's easy, but because he's enough. And that is wonderful, and his grace is sufficient.
Yeah, I had complete peace through that whole time. And I think part of that was before I had cancer, I had walked through divorce, and that was extremely hard. And but God had already proven himself to me. So when
Right.
I found out I was sick, it was just like, okay, Lord, what are you going to do with this? Like, I already know that you're going to take care of me. I know if I die, I'm going to go to heaven. So there wasn't a fear of that.
Mhm.
It was just getting through all of that and just the peace that passed all understanding in
Yeah.
that.
And that there, we talk about this verse, the peace that passeth all understanding. Because it passeth all understanding, I can't even explain it to you.
Yeah, right.
Like when you are in the place, and by the way, if this is your testimony, you can say this, where you've been in a dark spot and you're like, you don't even know how you got through it, but you got through it, but by the grace of God. And you're like, man, God carried me through. It's like the footprints in the sand.
Yeah.
This is where I carried you. And those two lines is where I dragged you. But the bottom line is God's going to get you through it, and he's going to provide what you need through it. And by the needs might not be what you want, and they might not be what you think you need, but they are what you need, because that's his promises. He is going to supply all of your needs according to his riches in Christ Jesus. Not as he wants, not all the comforts, not all the things that you think would be great, not all the icing on the cake, but what you need. And so we look at the peace that passeth understanding when you're going through a tremendously difficult time in your life and you're like, man, I can't do this. You're right. I was doing a thing last week on the fact that you're not enough. And that's the good news. We're in and of ourselves, we are not enough. And the good news is that because we are not enough, he is enough for us to carry us through, to get us through. And that is a beautiful picture of who God is to us and who he can be to you. But I will say this, it doesn't come automatically. You got to be intentional about your faith walk and your trusting him. And it doesn't mean it comes naturally in the sense of whatever, but I love this song. It says, you know, what's the song? It's like a little faith, but that's good because it's all I have. Like,
Is a little faith.
yeah, all you need is a little faith, and that's really good because sometimes that's all you have.
Mhm.
Listen, you don't need to have big faith. You just need to have mustard seed faith because you have a big God. And that is a wonderful picture. So as we continue on, we're looking at the timer, not that it even matters to us because we'll just flip it over. So 2022, at the same time she's going through cancer again. I don't know who she is. I don't know that she exists. Well, funny story is she came down when I was at West Coast Baptist College. She toured the college when I was there at campus. We never met.
Yeah.
And so, God had kind of, had our paths potentially crossed before, but to be honest, I don't know who she is. I moved down from Oregon with my family, with Alicia and my 4 kids, and we get down to Texas, work relocation. It was an absolute miserable move. We come down in July of 2022. Different grief story for sure, moving into a second floor apartment and traveling with 2 dogs and 4 kids and a sick wife. And it's just a lot. And so I say that we get down here, I'm starting really a new role, new opportunity here with work. And, and Alicia was going through some health stuff and some personal things, and different story, different time. And so in the fall of 22, as she is going through her kind of wrap up, and God has now answered the prayers of many who prayed for the cancer to be removed and for her body to be healed, she's getting to be a part of answered prayers. Now, there's a lot of Monica's life, and we'll talk about this in my life, where there's a lot of prayers we prayed that maybe God didn't answer our way, and didn't answer them yet. So we might have prayed for a lot of things, but at this point, she's dealt with the divorce, with her husband leaving her, and just a lot that's there, and a lot of dark that's there. Now she's fighting through cancer. Church is praying, church is supporting, people loving, parents praying, obviously a lot of support there, and God heals her body from cancer. And praise the Lord for that. Otherwise, she probably wouldn't be here. But real grateful for that. In the meantime, we get here 2022, get into the fall of 22, and we're going through different things in our life with some spiritual struggles and some mental health struggles and some alcohol struggles for Alicia, and we'll get into that at a different part of our life, but just a lot. Alicia was going through migraines, and she was dealing with fibromyalgia and just a lot of physical pain. She'd had an integrated migraine for 9 years, a migraine that had not gone away, and she was dealing with a lot of trauma that I say she was dealing with. She has had a lot of trauma that she had not dealt with, which I think was adding to her physical ailments. We get into October, November, and December of 2022, and I finally am able to get Alicia to go to a doctor. We'd fought for that for many years, trying to get her to just go deal with some health issues. She had some blood sugar issues. She had some, obviously, the migraine, and just we tried a lot of things over the years, but this had been finally like a retry. And so she starts with the doctor, and immediately they take a look at a dark spot in her skin. And she has melanoma cancer, and so they basically tell her to get a biopsy, and it had grown and developed over the years, and the doctor looked at it and immediately was like, "Hey, why haven't you had this looked at?" And our doctor back in Oregon, her doctor in Oregon, in 2000, and said, "There's no issue with that. Don't worry about it." And it gave a very specific reason of why she knew it was not skin cancer. That very specific reason was the same reason the other doctor said, "I'm pretty sure this is skin cancer." So my thing is this: go get checked. So they take a look at it and they're like, "Hey, you need it checked out." They do a biopsy, and immediately they're like, "Hey, by the way, this is cancerous. This is melanoma. We don't know to what level, but it's definitely progressed. You need to deal with this." And this is while Alicia's trying to do other doctor's appointments, and this is early spring of 23. We find out in man, it was I forget how it was, like January. We found out that it's cancerous, and she has to have surgery to remove the melanoma and see how deep it goes. And so as God is working in our lives, and by the way, we have a church who's very supportive of us that we barely know. Like, we've got a pastor who knows us, and Miss Emily, but we have a church who barely knows that we exist, and we barely know them. And immediately, as soon as pastor finds out, he calls and encourages us to move over closer to the church and to the school, and provides a resource for the kids to be able to get to school together. He knows it'll be good for us. And so God starts to work out details for us while we're in an apartment in Addison. We start looking for a rental, and God starts opening doors. And so what is unique is we watch our story, and we have a lot more that aligns, but during this season, she goes in for her second surgery 4 days. I think the 4 days that we looked up, 4 days apart from when Alicia goes in for her first surgery for cancer. Right. And so we have a lot going on at this point. she's going in, and the second surgery would be to reconnect the stoma and all that.
Yeah.
Let get rid of
Take
Ellie.
that.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
So long, Ellie.
yeah. And so she's in the process of healing from that. We start our cancer journey with Alicia, and they had removed the cancer, taken out the lymph node because they wanted to make sure that the cancer was not in the blood system. And the doctor told us, he's like, "Hey, I've seen this lots of times before." And he was a pretty confident, been doing this for a lot of years. He's like, "Hey, I don't think there's any more of this. We're going to remove this. She's going to heal it up. It's going to be great. Like it's just I'm not worried about it." That's a lot of peace coming from a doctor. And then during the surgery, while she's in recovery, I heard the same doctor say, "Hey, this is way deeper than we thought. It's pulled out the lymph node. It's pretty obvious that it's in the blood system. We'll talk about options. There's a pretty good option I think she should be on." And a few weeks later, we found out that the option that he recommended, it wouldn't have worked because her cancer had progressed too far. She was stage 4 melanoma. It's not stage 4 cancer, but it is stage 4 melanoma, which is a high progressed melanoma. It's in the blood system, and so. Um, God was working on a lot of details during this time. So I'm going to skip ahead.
Yep.
I'm going to go to August. So we get to a place. Alicia starts three. She's 3 treatments into Keytruda, and it's a lot. We have moved to a new place. God had gotten us to a rental house over in Garland, really close to the church, and that was in God's sovereignty, because as the next phase of our life hits, if we'd been in a 3-bedroom apartment in Addison, it would have just been so much more frustration and juggling and stuff. So we get through the second treatment for Alicia. The treatments really hit her hard. They told us it's not chemo, but it will affect you the same as chemo. And it really did. She can't keep anything down. She's very, very weak, can barely walk. And the doctors prescribed a steroid, which triggered and spiked her sugar, which was already messed up. So she's juggling that, we have a doctor who's trying to get her on new meds for her blood sugar. This spikes. And in a series of unfortunate events, her sugar is so messed up for really, it was just over a week's time. We've got an insurance issue, and it's just like this. It's just nothing came together the way that it should. And in hindsight, we can see the sovereignty of God, but it really comes down to like why, but also there is no answer for it. Um, and on a Saturday, she got very, very sick. Started throwing up. She got like a stomach bug or something, that in the process of the steroids, the blood sugar, and being dehydrated ultimately without us being aware, she was down. And really, we had a good day that day, other than the fact that she was throwing up all day. So we had a lot of good conversations. We hung out all day here. And that night, she was having a real rough night. And in the morning of August 13th, 2023, I woke up, and she had squeezed my hand and was kind of looking at me, and I was kind of holding her on my shoulder, and I just knew something was off. And so I kind of looked at her, and I could just feel her body just go limp. And that changed a lot for us. So there's a lot in that story of trying to resuscitate her, and emergency vehicles, and making sure the kids in the room and dogs and all that, and get to the hospital. And ultimately, we get to a place where, um, pastor shows up at the hospital, and Grace comes and gets the kids, and we're communicating to family members. I'm trying to communicate to my mom and dad, and to Alicia's mom and dad. And my one of my first thoughts, this is just honest to God, my first thoughts is, how in the world am I going to tell her daddy that I just lost his daughter? Like, how am I going to tell Brother Greg that I just lost Alicia? And to be honest, that still haunts me because I don't have an answer. Um, but they called right away, and they were very, very supportive, understanding of what was going on. And again, I don't have answers, and at least she'd been in the hospital before, but I knew this was going on. And when they rolled her out, the individual who rolled her out, and the lead um, emergency personnel that had responded, was very clear. He says, "Hey, the odds of her coming back are very, very low. The odds of her being alive are very, very low." They'd gotten a pulse, but he's like, it doesn't look good. If she comes out of the hospital, she's not coming home the same person that you knew yesterday. It's a very sobering thing. I texted my pastor on the way. He showed up, and Pastor Kirby showed up and hung out with me at the hospital. My sister Grace took the kids, and Nick took the kids for the day, and were very supportive. Obviously, there's a beautiful picture of how this week goes, but for the next really 48 hours between the church praying and us praying, and we're all praying for this miracle. And we've all seen miracles where people walk out of the hospital and there's just this prayer that God just intervenes, and Alicia is okay, and that she, gets out and finishes her fight with cancer, and gets her migraines taken care of, and then we live happily ever after, and the kids grow up and we do ministry together, and God is glorified, and that's not the rest of the story, because we prayed and prayed and many prayed, and ultimately she's not here today, and she's with Jesus today, and she's right where she belongs. And I'd say that not because I want pity or anything other than to say God was gracious enough to answer prayers, because to be honest, we'd been praying for years for Alicia to be healed from her many ailments and her pain and her migraine and some of her mental health issues and some of the things that she was dealing with and putting herself through. And God answered those prayers. But God did not answer those prayers the way that I thought he would and the way that I was praying he would. He did it beautifully. He did it in his sovereignty. He gave me some beautiful weeks of time where I had really the real version of her, where we had a lot of great conversations, and I'm very thankful for that. And I tremendously grieve losing Alicia and losing someone that I'd been married to for almost 13 years and been with for 16 years. Um, but God was very loving in allowing me to say goodbye, allowing us to have some of the time we did. And as we get to this version of the story, it's not because we wanted me to downside. This is very real to me. It's very real to Monica as well, and real to those that are family members that may listen to this, that were there during this time, and they were asking questions. And there's a lot of, like, okay, how did she die? And well, it's diabetic ketoacidosis. I'd never heard of that before. The doctor told me what that was, and I had to like look it up to figure out like what is diabetic ketoacidosis. Apparently, if your blood sugar is too high, you get dehydrated. It's very, 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 very dangerous. If you don't go to the hospital, you will die. And Alicia did. She went to cardiac arrest, and I lost her. I didn't really lose her anywhere where she's at. She's just not here. And we say that to say like, hey, well, God didn't answer our prayers. Well, no, he did. He healed Alicia in the most beautiful way possible, because she's never felt better. She loves Jesus more than I do. And that's pretty ironic to think about, but I love it. And so what I want to do is I want to jump back. So we have a week that then we're planning for a funeral, and there's a whole different podcast. We'll talk about really the blessings of what grief will do, and how it can be something that can bring a lot of people and a lot of healing together, as well as divide and cause pain. But there's a different side to the story. So while I'm going through really the darkest week of my life, wondering what in the world is God doing, and why did God move us to Texas, and am I supposed to stay here? And I know her parents are coming down to take us back to Oregon because I've got no support. Like, I've got all these things going on, and the end of my world has just happened. God has got a different answer to our prayers. And so while thousands of people prayed for her to walk out of the hospital, she did not walk out of the hospital, but she's not in the hospital. She's in heaven. So I'm going to flip this back over to Monica Sunday morning. I'm texting Pastor. Pastor comes for a few minutes. He came right before church even started. Like, the back, he shouldn't have been there. Like, to be honest, Pastor Green shouldn't have done that, right? But he was there for just a few minutes, prayed with us, just a few minutes, left Pastor Kirby there. And then he goes back to literally walk in, like
Yeah, he
walked
was
into
like
church.
running into church,
Yes.
running into church
Yeah.
because he didn't come in until after the music had
Yeah.
even was like over.
Right.
And so he came in, and at that point, I was sitting in the audience, and he was explaining why he frantically came in, and
Yeah.
was saying that he had been to the hospital with Luke and Allie Sorensen, and that this was a mom that had cancer, and she had 4 kids. And I don't know what it was about that just really stuck with me. I think probably because I had walked my own journey of cancer, and just the thought of like that I survived, and that, there's a mom of 4 in the hospital fighting for her life. And so over the next like several days, we prayed, that Jesus would save her and heal her body. And then I think it was Tuesday. She passed away on a Tuesday. My dad works on staff at church, so he got a text saying that Allie had passed away at that point.
Yeah. So walk through Sunday morning, and I know you had some questions there for other, trying to figure out who Allie was and all that.
Oh,
So
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I was trying to figure out who that was, because I had never heard that name. I had never, and then Pastor Rob was like, yeah, she had a scarf. And immediately my mind was like, okay, how did I miss someone with a scarf? Because I had literally just stopped wearing one myself. And so after the service, I went into the lobby and was asking the writers if they knew who Allie Sorensen was. And they were like, I don't know who that is. We might know who it is, but they weren't sure until then I had looked up Allie Sorensen on Facebook like later that day and I couldn't find you guys. So
Yeah, it was interesting because we had come and we started going to church, but we really for the first several months hadn't been super steady just because it was kind of every other week, 2022, and then we kind of got to the place where we really started like, I want to serve in ministry. Alicia was like, I don't want you to serve in ministry. There's a lot going on there. I was really thrilled that we were actually at the church at all, to be honest, with where stuff was at. And just, I was going to bring the kids to church, but the fact that she was coming with me was a lot. So we tried to make sure that if when we went to church, if she was willing to go, that was good. And so we would do whatever. So we were always late, 11 o'clock service, kids checking in, right? And with that between her,
yeah, and then that makes sense because
yes,
I had been out,
for cancer
yes,
and
for
surgery.
surgery. So yeah, it
And
makes
then
a lot of
summertime, she's,
sense.
Monica's in the choir, but she hadn't been in the choir because choir was out for the summer.
Right.
The kids had gotten to go to junior camp. So there's just been a jumble, but we go to the 11 a.m. service and we're always late. So to be honest, the odds of connecting and us even knowing who Monica was, I think, the kids were actually in her parents' Sunday school maybe once or twice, but so they knew
Yeah.
of them because just God had kind of put us in the place where we were in the same place, but we had not interacted.
Yeah.
Had no idea who the Pinkertons were, or who Monica was. So we go through that week. We prepare for a funeral, and again, we'll talk more about the week and what God did during that week. I do believe that when God removes choices from you as heavy as someone you love passing away, or some of the situations that you go through where there was no choice for you. I very much believe that if you rely on him and give it to him, that he will give you the peace that passeth all understanding. And I don't know how to describe it because it does pass understanding. Like, you either know it and you've experienced it and you know exactly what I'm talking about, where there's the overwhelm of whatever you're going through. And then there's the overwhelming feeling of like, I am in despair and still in the arms of God. And I don't know how to explain that feeling of I have zero control and am fully aware that while I don't know what's going on, I know the one who does know what's going on. And God did that for us. He did that with the support of thousands of people, the prayers, the financial giving, just the cards that we received and the love that we received that week, the dozens and dozens and dozens of Facebook messages and text messages from around the world, of people that we'd known, and some people I have no idea. Like, to be honest, we've connected since Alicia passed away, but I didn't know you before then, and I'm grateful for you. So we prep for the funeral, and I'm asking all sorts of questions of why, but also seeing God work in a beautiful way between my brother-in-law, my future brother-in-law, Nick gets saved. And that was on Thursday night, at 4:40 p.m., 4:44 p.m. Alicia was big into numbers, so the 4:44 was a big deal. The fact, and it wasn't intentional. That was just where God had done a work, and God was being glorified that week in the healing that was going on between families and communication and connecting, and the so many. But then we get to Saturday, and here's a funeral where I was planning on preaching it, and I'm very grateful for the wisdom of Pastor Green and Pastor Kirby and my brother Greg and Miss Tina, my mother-in-law and father-in-law, and their wisdom of saying, no, Pastor Green's graciously preaching the funeral, but we're trying to do a funeral for someone that for a long time hadn't walked with God and really didn't have a relationship with Jesus. Yes, Alicia was saved and knew that she was saved. She knew God, but there were times when she struggled with that. Different podcasts, different messaging. But I'm trying to just, how do we glorify God with the life where I don't want to air her dirty laundry, but I want God to be glorified and the gospel to be presented. And I know where Alicia is now. She wants people to know Jesus because she loves Jesus more than ever, right? And so Pastor Green did a great job of that, and I was able to share at the funeral. But God was glorified at the funeral. We I believe 7 people saved, and just a lot of support. We had we're in Texas, and other than my sister Grace, being here and some cousins. We don't have a lot of family close by here. And so to have, about 100 and some people there at the funeral, and many of my siblings were able to come down, and the ones that couldn't really wanted to be here, but were very supportive. And between Hannah sending 27,000 boxes of Kleenex and a whole Costco order of all the snacks and stuff we went through a lot of just people loving on us that lasted a long time. I think we're still dealing with. I think I still have the Kleenex, so like we tried a lot, but there's a lot of Kleenex Costco style, and just the love of many. And I don't think there's anything I can ever be able to say to convey how grateful and how overwhelmingly supported I was and felt because of work and people and love, not because God answered my prayers, but because God answered my prayers. Not because he answered them the way that I prayed and the way that I wanted, but he did answer them. And what was my absolute wit's end, flip over this hourglass here, was the start of something that only God could and would. Because the funeral happens, and Monica didn't actually come to the funeral. Just want to throw that out there. She didn't.
I watched the funeral. The night, or I guess the funeral happened in the daytime, so in the evening, I found it on Facebook. I think it was like the church website or whatever, and I watched it, and I was in a weird place as far as the previous year. I had been dating someone, super nice guy, but he just was not for me. And I really struggled with peace through through the whole process. Like, he was a great guy. My parents liked him. My friends liked him. There was no reason that I shouldn't like him. But I just didn't have peace about it. And so when I was watching the funeral, Luke got up and was like, "My name is Luke Sorensen. I genuinely care about people." And there was just something about him saying that just was like, wow, like this guy has like a logo and it was just,
Motto,
I had
yeah.
never in my life met someone that that said something like that. I don't know. I don't know.
Meanwhile,
It was just very capturing to me. I don't even
everybody
know how
else
to
is
explain
listening
it.
is like, "You've got to be kidding me." That's what it was like.
Line.
Yeah, everybody from work that knows me is like, "Oh, there he goes again," right? Yeah.
And then even not too long after you said that, you were like, we're not mad at God. And that was another statement that really just stuck out to me because I had walked through my own divorce and cancer, and God was so real to me. Like, when you walk through stuff like that, like, I believe that your best view of Jesus is when you are walking through the trials of life, because that's all you can see.
Right.
And so for someone to get up and say, "Hey, my name's Luke Sorensen and I genuinely care about people and we're not mad at God," just really spoke to me. I was just like, wow, I want to marry someone like Luke Sorensen, not Luke Sorensen. It was just very much,
Because I have
I
4
want to marry
kids, and
someone
yeah,
like Luke Sorensen.
yeah.
And so I don't even know where to go with that. Other than like, I was just so mesmerized by that.
Not
Not
mesmerized by me.
Yeah, not you,
Just wanna throw this
but
out there. This is
just
God's peace, and seeing that
I think
we're
another
go
thing
yeah.
was, like, because of, like, how old was I at the time? 34, 35, and just was like, "Wow, there's someone else that's." I just assumed that we were sort of the same age because actually pastor on Sunday had told actually how old you were, and so it was like,
That's
"Wow,
good to
there's."
know.
Yeah, he did, he
Yeah,
said that, because he was
yeah,
like, "Oh, a 35-year-old dad,"
yeah.
and so anyway, but so there was just something about that was just like, wow, so someone else my age has walked through a lot of awfulness and they can stand up in front of everyone and say, you know, we're not mad at God. Like, I wasn't mad at God for all of the things that I had been through. Like, he was so real to me at that point in my life.
Yeah, I'll say this to the glory of God. I do believe that when you're under the pressure, when you are going through really, really hard times, when there is the pressure, it reveals who you are. So make sure you're somebody worth revealing. But to be honest, when it comes to a Christian, it reveals who God is to you. And I'm not saying that God can't use situations, and I believe he does use situations to really put you through the fire to so that you can come forth as gold. But if you're going through the fire and you're not gold, you're not going to come out as gold. You might come out realizing that you should be, and you need to do what it takes to be worth refining, but the refiner's fire reveals exactly what you're made of. And to be honest, I was very afraid that I was not going to be worth revealing what I was made of because I was still struggling with my own faith and my own questions. But I'll say this again, when God takes away a choice, he gives you the opportunity to trust him and surrender to him. And as an individual, if you're going through it, you're like, well, I don't have that kind of faith, or I'm struggling and I have my own issues. So do we. So did I, so do I. And but by the grace of God, here go I. And in that moment, there's a place where you can just surrender it to God and really understand, as much as this is a spiritual warfare and it's a spiritual fight, and you can put on all the armor of God, and you should. When you're done, you fight that battle on your knees because you're giving it to God so he can fight it for you and show himself strong on your behalf, because he will and he wants to. So when you're praying, a lot of those prayers, a lot of times we are praying selfishly. We ask amiss because we're trying to consume it upon our own lust. And a lot of times God is using that refiner's fire in that time to allow you to ultimately change who you are, which changes what you pray. And ultimately, the outcome is you walk closer to God, because I'm not mad at God. I'm not mad at God. God's the one thing that's got me through this. And while I don't understand it, especially at that time where I'm talking at my wife's memorial service, I don't know what's next. I know that he's in the next phase of my life. I don't know what the next phase looks like. And so for me, walking into this, I'm now a single dad with 4 kids that I've got to figure out all the stuff that I got to get them through, which would be previous trauma from some of the stuff that they've been through, and now the trauma of losing their mom. And there's an overwhelming sense of, I cannot do this. I am not enough. And that's the good news, because Jesus is. And so as we kind of wrap up this version of our story, this part of it, this is where God started to work in Monica's heart, not because she was interested in me, because that was not the case. And that we have proof from the many people who know Monica that somebody with 4 kids was not on her list to even consider.
I
Uh,
wouldn't even date anybody that had kids.
yeah,
Like, it was
no.
a no-no.
Yeah, and we'll talk more. It doesn't mean she hates kids, but she doesn't like them. She loves our kids, but they're the exception. This was not a, oh well, I gotta go find. Literally, she avoided me for several months, and I just happened to get in the way, and God did a work in her heart and in my life and in the support of what we were going through. And spiritually, for me, I was about to face some real interesting spiritual battles of, how do I trust God during this time when I don't know what the next step is, what the next move is. And there's a lot of things that get thrown at you when you're in the situation. And if you've been there, you understand. But what God did in that season of the next several months is a really beautiful story that we are looking forward to sharing really over the next couple of podcasts of how God brought us together, which is kind of funny. And there's a lot of funny and joy. And then how, when we actually connected, some of the, wow, our lives, God has been working in our lives and through our lives to get us to the place that, I being in the way the Lord led me and put us together in a way that when we connected, it's like, wow, God loves us that much. And God actually was answering prayers that we were praying, not in the way that we were praying them. Because to be honest, I wasn't looking for another wife. I had a wife and I loved her dearly. Now at this point, and looking back, there's just this beautiful picture of like, wow, I am the most blessed man I know. Like, I am the luckiest person I know. And I can't, it's not that life and circumstances are always easy. We've got bills, we've got 3 bad boys, we've got, Jacqueline, at least we have Jacqueline, right? We've got life, we've got family drama. When you marry someone within 6 months of your wife passing, there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of perception and hurt that we've accidentally caused, that we didn't mean to, and hurt that other people have caused and they may not have meant to or meant to, I don't know. But a perfect life, I think Elizabeth Elliot said it so well. Joy and contentment is not me in a different set of circumstances. It is me with Jesus. And I think that as we go through this, if I can tell anyone anything about the love and grace of Jesus, is that your love and your contentment has nothing to do with your circumstances and has everything to do with your Savior. And if you're not willing to let Jesus be Lord of all, and that's it, then you're really going to struggle getting through and being at the place where you can just, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I think there's a beautiful picture of what Job has given us an example of when you're going through hard times. God has a greater purpose, and part of his no sometimes is the most loving thing he can do for you and the most beautiful thing he can do for you. And yet, sometimes we get a no and we throw a little temper tantrum demanding that God do it our way. And I just want to say, like, hey, I feel like with the Silver Lining podcast, we have the opportunity to share the beauty of God's no's and the beauty of God answering prayers, but not our way. Any thoughts?
That's a good way to put that.
Yeah. I wish I could give it the credit to me, but I think I'll just give that to Jesus. So, so we'll look forward to seeing you next time as we continue the story, and there'll be some laughter. There'll probably be some tears on my part. Monica doesn't cry on camera. Um, but, uh, but we look forward to continuing to share really his story in our lives and try to be an encouragement. And really a lot of what we do is share, we're sharing our story to be an encouragement to you during your grief story. So if you're in a place where you're really just going through it, we empathize, we sympathize, we want to pray with you and for you. We don't know who you are, but we do pray for our listeners. And you say, well, how does that work? Well, we literally say, well, Lord, please be with our listeners. I don't know your name, but Jesus does. And we want to let you know that Jesus is there for you and for your good and his glory. We look forward to seeing you next time.
We'll pretend that you finished before the timer went off,
We'll pretend.
but I know the truth.
Yeah, right.